Welcome to chapter 16, and things fall apart. You'll recall chapter 15, there was a story about the massacre of Abame, and white people are showing up now. When nearly 2 years later, Obierica paid another visit to his friend in exile, the circumstances were less happy. The missionaries had come to Umuafia. They had built their church there, won a handful of converts, and were already sending evangelists to the surrounding towns and villages. An evangelist is somebody who goes out and spreads the message of their religion. That was a source of great sorrow to the leaders of the clan, but many of them believed that the strange faith in the white man's God would not last. None of his converts was a man whose word was heeded in the assembly of the people. None of them was a man of title. They were mostly the kind of people that were called efulefu, worthless, empty men. The imagery of an efulefu in the language of the clan was a man who sold his machete and wore the sheath to battle. So a sheath is just the thing that you hold your machete in. So they're kind of foolish in the eyes of the clan. Chielo, the priestess of Agbala, called the converts the excrement of the clan, and the new faith was a mad dog that had come to eat it up. So you can tell that Chielo really is not happy with this new religion. And so at the very beginning of chapter 16, we have a lot of information. White people are now in Umuafia. They've built a church, and they're starting to win over some of the local people. Some of the clansmen are converting from the Igbo religion to the white man's religion, which is Christianity. What moved Obierica to visit Okonkwo was the sudden appearance of the latter's son, Nwoye, among the missionaries in Umuafia. So now Nwoye has been kind of hanging out with some of these missionaries. "What are you doing here?" Obierica had asked when, after many difficulties, the missionaries had allowed him to speak to the boy. "I am one of them," replied Nwoye. "How is your father?" Obierica asked, not knowing what else to say. "I don't know. He is not my father," said Nwoye unhappily. And so Obierica went to Mbanta to see his friend, and he found that Okonkwo did not wish to speak about Nwoye. It was only from Nwoye's mother that he heard scraps of the story. The arrival of the missionaries had caused a considerable stir in the village of Mbanta. There were 6 of them, and one was a white man. Every man and woman came out to see the white man. Stories about these strange men had grown since one of them had been killed in Abame, and his iron horse tied to the sacred silk cotton tree. And so everybody came to see the white man. It was the time of year when everybody was at home. The harvest was over. When they had all gathered, the white man began to speak to them. He spoke through an interpreter who was an Igbo man, though his dialect was different and harsh to the ears of Mbanta. So this guy, the interpreter, has kind of an accent or a different dialect. So it'd be kind of like somebody from the deep south talking to somebody from the far north, kind of like Maine or something like that. They would have different dialects, and they would sound different when they spoke, and they would have a little bit of confusion probably in some cases. Many people laughed at his dialect and the way he used words strangely. Instead of saying myself, he always said my buttocks. And the reason that he's having difficulty here is because the Igbo language is a tonal language. So depending on what kind of emphasis you put on a word, it's going to mean something different. So when he's saying myself, it's really close to the Igbo word for my buttocks. And so there's some confusion there. And we also have that kind of confusion, especially in southern states, where you may have a word like pen, like an ink pen, but then you also have a safety pin. And sometimes you have, a confusion where somebody says, "Let me see that pen there." And you don't know if they're talking about like a safety pin or an ink pen because of the way that they've said the word. But he was a man of commanding presence, and the clansmen listened to him. He said he was one of them, as they could see from his color and his language. The other 4 black men were also their brothers, although one of them did not speak Igbo. The white man was also their brother, because they were all sons of God. And he told them about this new God, the creator of all the world and all the men and women. He told them that they worshipped false gods, gods of wood and stone. A deep murmur went through the crowd when he said this. He told them that the true God lived on high, and that all men, when they died, went before him for judgment. Evil men and all the heathen who in their blindness bowed to wood and stone were thrown into a fire that burned like palm oil. But good men who worship the true God live forever in his happy kingdom. We have been sent by this great God to ask you to leave your wicked ways and false gods, and turn to him so that you may be saved when you die, he said. Your buttocks understand our language, said someone lightheartedly, and the crowd laughed. What did he say? The white man asked his interpreter. But before he could answer, another man asked a question. Where is the white man's horse? He asked. The Igbo evangelists consulted among themselves and decided that the man probably meant bicycle. They told the white man, and he smiled benevolently. Tell them, he said, that I shall bring many iron horses when we have settled down among them. Some of them will even ride the iron horse themselves. This was interpreted to them, but very few of them heard. They were talking excitedly among themselves, because the white man said that he was going to live among them. They had not thought about that. And that's what colonialism is. Colonialism is when people colonize. And to colonize, you have to kind of you have to live there, basically. So now these people know, oh my goodness, this white person is going to live amongst us. At this point, an old man said he had a question. Which is this God of yours? He asked. The goddess of the earth? The god of the sky? Amadiora? Or the thunderbolt? Or what? The interpreter spoke to the white man, and he immediately gave his answer. All the gods you have named are not gods at all. They are gods of deceit, who tell you to kill your fellows and destroy innocent children. There is only one true God, and he has the earth, the sky, you and me, and all of us. If we leave our gods and follow your God, asked another man, who will protect us from the anger of our neglected gods and ancestors? Your gods are not alive and cannot do you any harm, replied the white man. They are pieces of wood and stone. So basically this white guy has showed up and told them that their way of life that they've lived for centuries and centuries is completely wrong, and that they are kind of foolish. So it's really kind of offensive and presumptive of this white guy to think that. When this was interpreted to the men of Mbanta, they broke into derisive laughter, and derisive means that they're kind of ridiculing this white guy. These men must be mad, they said to themselves. How else could they say that Ani and Amadiora were harmless, and Idemili and Ogwugwu too? And some of them began to go away. Then the missionaries burst into song. It was one of those gay and rollicking tunes of evangelism which had the power of plucking its silent and dusty chords in the heart of an Igbo man. The interpreter explained each verse to the audience, some of whom now stood enthralled. It was a story of brothers who lived in darkness and in fear, ignorant of the love of God. It told of one sheep out on the hills, away from the gates of God, and from the tender shepherd's care. After the singing, the interpreter spoke about the Son of God, whose name was Jesu Christi. A Okonkwo, who only stayed in the hope that it might come to chasing the men out of the village, or whipping them, now said, You told us with your own mouth that there was only one God. Now you talk about his son. He must have a wife then. The crowd agreed. I did not say he had a wife, said the interpreter somewhat lamely. Your buttocks said he had a son, said the joker. So he must have a wife, and all of them must have buttocks. The missionary ignored him and went on to talk about the Holy Trinity. At the end of it, Okonkwo was fully convinced that the man was mad. He shrugged his shoulders and went away to tap his afternoon palm wine. But there was a young lad who had been captivated. His name was Nwoye, Okonkwo's first son. It was not the mad logic of the Trinity that captivated him. He did not understand it. It was the poetry of the new religion, something felt in the marrow. The hymn about brothers who sat in darkness and in fear seemed to answer a vague and persistent question that haunted his young soul. The question of the twins crying in the bush, and the question of Akemefuna who was killed. He felt a relief within as the hymn poured into his parched soul. The words of the hymn were like the drops of frozen rain melting on the dry palate of the panting earth. Nwoye's callow mind was greatly puzzled. So, for Nwoye, this religion gives him answers to questions that he has. And it comforts him. And so he's interested in it. Okonkwo only stuck around so that he could potentially engage in some violent acts against these men, because that's the kind of a guy that Okonkwo is. So you see that these white people have come in and they've brought religion, and they're starting to convert some of these Igbo people, and we'll see what kind of destruction will follow them. We know that they have to be a destructive force because they've been compared to the locusts, and we know that locusts are a destructive force. So the plot is definitely getting thicker and thicker, and as the title suggests, things are going to start falling apart for these Igbo people. Next time we'll get into chapter 17.